Self-regulated learning and performance refers to the processes whereby learners personally activate and sustain cognitions, affects, and behaviors that are systematically oriented toward attainment of personal goals. That's self-regulated learning. Basically, nobody is pushing you. You're pushing yourself. You set your goals. You allot your time. You make a plan, and you monitor your progress until you reach the goal. That's self-regulated learning. In an earlier article by Zimmerman, he outlined various aspects of self-regulation as illustrated on this chart. We can see under the box forethought phase, under task analysis, we have goal setting and strategic planning. And when it comes to language learning, that means setting a specific goal, like I'll pass the JLPT N1 on December 1st, and plan it strategically in order to achieve it. For example, planning to study 6 hours a day for 3 months. Or in your case, depending on your circumstances, you might have to study 2 hours a day or even 1 hour a day, but for a longer stretch of time. In the same box under self-motivation beliefs, he listed outcome expectations, and that is to say having the belief that if I put in X amount of work, I'll expect X amount of result. For example, I have the belief that if I just put in 600 hours before the test, I'll be able to pass it. Right? I'll at least have a chance of passing it. And in the box on top, the one labeled performance phase, under the heading self-observation, he listed self-recording. That is, recording your work and your progress. For example, every day I used the time tracking app and recorded what I did and how many hours I spent. And finally, in the box on the right, the self-reflection phase, under the heading self-judgment, we have self-evaluation. That is, periodically test your knowledge and see if your language learning is successful. If not, you have to adjust your goals, rethink your plans, and rework your expectations. And so this then feeds back to the forethought phase in the cycle. So in the Teng and Zhang article, it tested whether self-regulated learning made a difference for 406 Chinese university students. And the conclusion was, quote, consistent with previous studies, self-regulated writing strategies significantly predicted EFL learners' writing performance. And here's another study by Teng et al. Again, 259 Chinese university students were studied on their self-regulated capacity in vocabulary learning. Right? So in this case, and this is more specific on vocabulary acquisition. And they were also tested on their vocabulary size. Our study shows that SRC Voc is a significant predictor of the learner's vocabulary knowledge. So if you want to learn vocabulary fast, you better have a plan and stick to the plan rather than just doing whatever you want, right? To elucidate, learners with high SRC Voc levels are more effective in setting learning goals, planning vocabulary acquisition, monitoring their progress, and modifying strategies when necessary. Yeah. So if you find that, oh, you're not learning as fast as you predicted, then you better modify your strategies. So according to these papers, planning ahead and scheduling your studies and sticking to a plan really helps your language progress. Now, here's my own experience with learning Japanese that demonstrates this. First, just like what Zimmerman said in that chart, for goal setting, on September 6th, for example, I signed up for the JLPT N1. So in that way, I set my goal. And for strategic planning, I told myself I must put in 600 hours. That means 6 hours a day. Right? So that was my strategic planning. And for outcome expectations, I did mock tests and expected to make the cut, right? Because after taking the mock test, I got 130, 120, so I know I can make the 100 mark cut. I kept careful records of study time and the number of words I learned, right? So for example, on November 13th, I learned 3 hours and 45 minutes of Japanese. I only round the numbers to the nearest 15-minute interval. Right? So it's not precise to the minute, but just precise to the quarter hour. And on that day, I learned 26 new words. Right? I know how many words I learned because I tracked them with Language Player. And this is in Japanese what I did. Right? For example, on November 16th, I did an official mock test. And On November 20th, I went over some Japanese vocabulary according to this reference book, etc., right? And as I mentioned earlier, I put in only 1,044 hours before the N1 test. It passed, but the score was not ideal. Right? Since N1, I put in another 490 hours, so up to yesterday, my total was 1,534 hours, right? So that was up to yesterday. If I take the test again, I now have like 50% more time put in. So if I take the test again, hopefully I can achieve a better grade. And my goal is by December 1st this year, I'll take the JLPT test again, right? I'll pay another $70. I'll probably go to Japan again and take the same test. By the time I take that test, hopefully, according to my plan, if I stick to my strategy, I will have put in 3,000 hours. Right? So that would be 3 times as much as what I had before. So hopefully I can achieve like a 80%, 90% on this test rather than just a passing grade. And that's what I did for planning. And now let's take a look at what other successful candidate did in terms of planning. Here's a report from a Reddit user named Taira no Lunemori. You'll note that this is someone who has never studied Japanese before. He went from 0 to N1 in just 17 months, which is quite amazing, right? Quite amazing. Notice how he carefully planned his studies. Under the subheading time spent in his Reddit post, he said, quote, "I didn't keep precise records, but it was like 2 to 3 hours a day for 16 months. And then 7.5 hours a day in the months leading up to the test, so somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,400 hours, similar to how much hours I have right now." From the report, you can see he had a very clear plan and consistently executed until he put in 1,400 hours, which is an incredible achievement. And in fact, look at this amazing infographic he made documenting his studies, right? I mean, how many of you have actually made something like this documenting your Chinese learning studies? Look at that. He started from July 2023 to January 2025, right? The test was December 2024. So really before the test, he only did up to here, right? So everything beyond that is after the test. So even up to here, he got 179, which is near perfect, right? Near perfect score, which is really amazing. And then for reading, he read all these books in Japanese, and for listening, he listened to all these podcasts. Right? I've gone through these grammar books as well, but not nearly as much as what he has put in. Right? But somehow he was able to do all of this in 1,400 hours, which is very, very impressive. And the second example I'd like to cite is a YouTuber's experience on how he passed the N1 test in just 19 months of study. Note how he self-regulated his studies. He said, quote, this is a transcript of the YouTube video. He said, quote, "I typically balanced about 5 hours of active study, including roughly 1 hour of reading and 4 hours of listening." And then he said, "Up until November, I took the test on December 1st and followed my usual routine, learning about 20 to 25 new words daily." Right? So he actually kept a careful record how many new words he learned per day. And for learning the words, he roughly put in an hour, sometimes a bit more. And then he said, doing some reading and spending 3 to 5 hours on active listening, depending on my available time. So again, as you can see, he carefully recorded his own learning, his activities, and adjusted them according to his needs. And then he says, quote, I set it as my goal a few months after I started recording all my study details, as I continue to do in my update videos. I note down how many hours I spend reading, listening, and which cards I create, cards meaning like flashcards, among other things. So this is very clear. He kept a very careful journal, and then he adjusted his plans according to his learning needs. So from the experience of both of these learners, you can see how much having a plan and sticking to the plan, and that is using self-regulated learning strategies, can really help you, right? And it really helped me as well, right?